Hey everyone, welcome back to talking about humor and different humor tactics. So the first one that we're going to talk about is thoughts versus words. So you can make what your character thinks different or the direct opposite of what he says. Now this is usually best when the thought is paired closely with the character's dialogue. So The Office uses this one a lot. So they use it by pulling aside the character to get their thoughts on a situation where they behave differently. One of my favorite examples of this in The Office is, so there's a character named Kelly who's dating another character named Ryan, and they have a pretty rocky relationship, and Kelly's very overdramatic. Anyway, they broke up, but Ryan's back, I think, like visiting for that day, and Kelly's trying to talk him into going out, having him ask her out on a date to a fancy restaurant, and he's like, no, no, no. And finally, Kelly says to Ryan, well, I hope you're ready for responsibility, or something like that. She's like, because I'm pregnant. And he's like, oh, and then it like comes in on his face, close up. And then it cuts and it shows Kelly and she's shaking her head, right? And we laugh because we have what she's actually saying paired with what like her thoughts or reality. And the way they've cut this in the episode, they're right next to each other and it's very quick and it's very funny. So you can have your character say one thing and then near it have them genuinely think something else. An alternative to this is having a character that is like mentally absent from the conversation. To really make this one work though, you've got to have a fun, humorous voice. Otherwise, it'll just be blah. So Kuzco in The Emperor's New Groove, he has a great voice for this, and there's this part that is kind of, I guess, famous in that movie, which is, Izuma's talking to him, and we can tell, because we're kind of in his viewpoint, right, that he's, like, not really paying attention, and he's just making comments about how she looks, and he sees something in her teeth, and he's like, how long has that been there, right? And so it's funny because he's not even, like, listening, his thoughts aren't even present with what's going on. Alright, the next one I would call awkward humor, or awkward and reactionary, because usually a lot of times it's the reactionary part that's funny, depending on how it's handled. So, and this could just be me, but I feel like the whole awkward is humor phenomenon is pretty recent. In this technique, it's the awkwardness that makes us laugh. So a lot of the other tactics work off irony or opposition or exaggeration, but this one is achieved by making a situation slightly off. Things just don't quite fit right. And this kind of humor usually makes us laugh at the character's reactions to the awkwardness. So sometimes it's like we are watching the awkward situation unfold and laughing at it, right? And there are some good examples of this in Emperor's New Groove. But other times it feels like we are in the awkward situation, and sometimes for people that feeling is what makes us laugh. So in that latter version, where we ourselves feel like the character, for some people, it's too intense and it makes them too uncomfortable because they just have that empathetic, I don't know, because I feel like I'm usually kind of empathetic, but it doesn't affect me this way, but they have this empathetic connection where it makes them feel uncomfortable on behalf of the characters, even though it's fiction, right? And so there's that aspect too. But this type of humor often works off of relatability humor too. So we laugh because we can relate to that awkward moment or that feeling, or this off beating around the bush humor can work off of that, what's not said. And other times it's just funny because it's awkward. So in The Office, there's this part where the character Ryan takes over Pam's job as secretary. Now, Pam's desk is kind of, their boss, Michael, his office has like windows, right? And through his windows, he can usually see Pam. Anyway, so we have this part where the camera crew are talking to Ryan about, what's going on. And Ryan's like, oh, and also Jim is usually seated by Pam's desk too, right? And he looks at her, and Jim's dating Pam. Anyway, Ryan goes, Jim's been looking at me kind of a lot all week. I would be creeped out by it, but it's nothing compared to the way Michael looks at me. So then we see there's, Ryan's typing at the reception desk, he stops typing and he looks over, and all of a sudden there's this shot of Michael looking through the blinds of his office, just like staring, and the way they've done the shot, it's like creepy, and like the situation is so awkward. And so it's very funny if you're into that kind of humor. I watched an interview with Rainn Wilson, who plays Dwight in The Office, and he was talking about the type of humor The Office works off of. And he called it, like I've touched on, reactionary humor. So if you're dealing with reactionary humor in addition to the awkwardness, the reactionary humor, instead of having like a punchline be the funny part, that's kind of the beat you often get with humor, right? Set up, punchline, and then that's what's funny. In this, it's often people's reactions to it that are funny, and that's one of the reasons why The Office uses awkward humor so well, right? One way to get funny reactions is to amp up awkwardness, and like the boss Michael says some of the most ridiculous or stupid things and makes things so awkward, and then, the camera crew will just just zoom in on somebody's reactions, and it's funny. Okay, so to do awkward humor, you've got to make situations a little bit off, like I touched about. So you want to play with, like, just simple weirdness, like in that example I have of Michael staring at Ryan while he's typing, right? You can play with that. You can play with characters' reactions, or play with what's not said. And the more you play with the characters who don't want to say what they... Oh, so also, yeah, I was going to talk about this. Sorry, got ahead of myself a little bit. You can also make it awkward by kind of like I said, it can go with beating around the bush, by characters not wanting to say something straight out, and maybe one of them kind of wanting them to passive aggressively, and not wanting to say it, and it makes the situation progressively more awkward, right? Because neither of them want to say it. Like having an elephant in the room, I guess you could say, and it gets awkward. So you can play with that too. So, yeah, sorry. Okay. And then, again, Michael Scott's character works off a lot of awkward humor because he's always trying to be something, and people either are, like, constantly one-upping him or indirectly, sometimes innocently, insulting him, which makes it really awkward. So a lot of the times he undercuts what he's trying to do by doing something unintentionally offensive or stupid or whatever. Alright, then we have playing with stereotypes, right? So you can use stereotypes to your advantage to be funny. So Enchanted is funny because it's making fun of Disney princess stereotypes. The Office frequently makes fun of stereotypes too. They use a lot of humor that could be really offensive. Only it's, not, because when you look beyond the one-liner jokes, you realize that the writers themselves are making fun of stereotypes and illustrating the stupidity of stereotypes. So with this humor, you're playing off stereotypes intentionally, and you might need to go, okay, most of the time, you need to alert to your audience that what you're doing is intentional, okay? Because you could really mess this one up if it's not clear to the reader that you're, like, laughing at these stereotypes, and if you just kind of put them in, like, okay, I guess what I'm saying is, there's things like racial stereotypes and religious stereotypes that can potentially be offensive to people. If you're gonna make fun of those stereotypes, you need to, like, make sure the audience knows that you're making fun of the stereotypes, and you're not, like, making fun of the people those stereotypes represent, if that makes sense. Then there's things like Enchanted, where it's like, okay, they're making fun of Disney princesses. I don't think that's going to offend anyone. Well, actually, I'm probably wrong, because everybody gets offended these days. But, it's not as touchy as maybe if you're working with racial or religious stereotypes. But you can pull those off, too. You just need to make sure you're handling it right, and you're not encouraging those stereotypes, you're poking fun at them or deconstructing them. Yeah, so Enchanted, there's that great clip where it's a happy working song and they're cleaning this apartment and you see all these critters and there's like cockroaches and there's pigeons that are missing legs, and it's very funny because it's making fun of those stereotypes. In reality, what would that be like? Stupidity humor, okay? So let's be honest, there are some things that are funny just because they're just plain stupid, right? So if you look at shows like the Funniest Home Videos, usually those work off of this technique. I mean, there's really not that much more to say about being stupid. It just works off of the idea of people being dumb, right? Zoolander. Oh my gosh. And there's this part in Zoolander where the models get into this gas fight. They're using gasoline like it's water, and what happens is just so stupid that it's funny. Then, of course, you can look at movies like Dumb and Dumber. Characters often play into it. So it's like Dory in Finding Nemo. Some of the things she says are just so dumb that it's hilarious. And you can play with innocence with this humor and have moments where characters are just oblivious to things. The male models are oblivious to the dangers of playing gasoline, right? And maybe the characters in Dumb and Dumber, they're oblivious to how they're annoying this hitchhiker friend that they've picked up. And those are some of the techniques, this master list that I have of writing humor. There's one last section that I think is pretty important. Alright, so in closing, I did want to touch on this aspect of making humor and character coincide. So usually certain characters are lend themselves more to certain kinds of humor. So obviously Buddy the Elf lends himself more to fish out of water humor because of who he is and his situation, right? Dumb and Dumber, I mean, the characters lend themselves more to just being stupid. You can look at your cast of characters and look at the type of story that you're telling and be able to see what kind of humor those characters or that situation naturally brings to the table, right? Ideally with your cast, if you're working with a lot of humor, or in order to get a lot of humor, you want characters that have opposites, that foil each other in some way. So, in that article I've mentioned in another video, it's a humor article by Film Critic Hulk. That's the name that this person writes under. It's a humor article about Guardians of the Galaxy, and in it, the writer talks about the pairing of these characters and how they actually play off each other for more humor because of the way that they are opposites, right? Even just like Rocket and Groot, okay? Rocket is very like cynical and sarcastic and doesn't want to get close to people, pushes people away, and Groot is very innocent, and he's like the muscles, but he's innocent and not as tainted or as cynical, right? So those characters work off each other. Then you have Star-Lord, who works off well with Gamora, right? Because Star-Lord and his dancing and just wanting to kind of be in love and in a relationship and just kind of a goofball sometimes, with Gamora, who's very serious and takes things seriously, says she won't dance. And so you can see how characters, making your humor and character coincide is a often important thing to look into, and it will make writing humor easier. Either if you want to start with something funny, you can kind of work backwards. Okay, how am I going to affect my cast? How am I going to tweak my cast to make this funnier? Or let's look at my cast and see what they already bring to the table, which of these types of humor they bring to the table that I can build off of. In closing, this has been my guide to writing humor. If you've missed any of the videos, you can search for them, go back, you can find them on my page, and get all of the humor tactics. So hopefully these will help you in your quest to write humor. I am open to adding to this list if there are more tactics that you have thought of, or more that I think of in the future. Anyway, so I know this is a long playlist if you've watched all these videos, and it's taken weeks, I guess really months, to go through all of them, but I hope it's helpful to you. You can get my latest writing tips at septembercfox.com. Please follow me, subscribe, love all of the support, and good luck with your writing.